Hi and welcome to another story, and today we have part 5 of Head Kid by David Baddiel, continuing from chapter 25. Oh, Headmaster Carter! Everyone stopped grabbing sweets and looked around. At the back of the dining hall, one child had stood on a chair. It was Ryan Ward. Just stop, he continued, still sounding very grown up. He sounded, to use quite a long and difficult word, very authoritative, like someone in authority, to make it a series of slightly smaller words. It's bad enough that you're all going to eat this food, none of which is approved by Jamie Oliver. A number of pupils and teachers frowned at this thought. Miss Gerard even woke up. But if you are going to eat this junk, then at least can we form a proper queue? Now everyone frowned, especially Diona, who, while still frowning, said, "Ryan, are you okay?" He didn't answer her, but she felt worried. He had been behaving so weirdly since coming back from hospital, and now his voice, even though it was definitely his voice, didn't sound like him at all. Yes. "Good question, Diona," said Mr. Carter. He was the only one who wasn't actually frowning. "Are you okay?" "Yes, Mr. Carter," said Ryan, staring at him. He spoke calmly and slowly and made the words Mr. Carter, much like in the lesson that morning he had made the words head teacher sound sarcastic. "I'm fine." "Are you?" said Mr. Carter. "Because I think it's perfectly fine the way lunch is going at the moment. I think everyone scrambling over each other and fighting for sweets is fun. You're all enjoying it, aren't you?" he added, turning to the pupils. "Yes," said Maurice Fawcett. Well, he actually said, because his mouth was already full of topic. "OK, so, relax, Ryan." Mr. Carter went over to him. "Chill, take a load off, relax, wind down, loosen your goose." Now everyone moved their frowns towards Mr. Carter. Diona thought, never mind Ryan not sounding like himself. Who is Mr. Carter sounding like now? "Right, well, that's very head-teacherly talk, isn't it?" said Ryan. He was still standing on the chair, so his eyes were at the same level as the head teacher's. In fact, they may have been even higher. For a second, at least from Diona's point of view, it looked like Ryan was the adult and Mr. Carter was the child. Odd this, isn't it? The people talking properly, the head teacher using stupid slang. "Hey, I was using it ironically. I'd never actually say Skrillex seriously." "But odder still," said Ryan, looking around, "is this whole situation. A head teacher changing the lunch menu to sweets, and a pupil complaining about it. A head teacher saying, hey, let's just have a free-for-all, and a pupil saying, no, I think everyone should queue up quietly and properly. What is going on? What does everyone here think is going on?" The pupils looked at each other. A few murmurs of, "It's a bit odd," and "Yeah, that is kind of upside down from normal," and were heard, alongside one of, "Yum, I love topics." Mr. Carter looked over his shoulder at the dining hall. For a second, a cloud of doubt passed across his face, as if Ryan pointing out the strangeness of the whole thing had thrown him. But then he turned back to Ryan, smiled and said, "Not just any pupil, Ryan. The naughtiest pupil in the school." And the naughtiest people in the school would always go up against the head teacher, wouldn't they? Even if the head teacher was doing something fun and crazy that most kids would like. Even if they gave the whole school the day off after lunch, which maybe I will. "Don't do that," Ryan shouted. "You see," said Mr. Carter to the watching children. Some of them were staring at Ryan now, and not in a good way. "Or if I said that no one has to come in tomorrow either?" "That would be ridiculous," shouted Ryan. "No, it wouldn't," shouted Malcolm Bailey. "It would be great," shouted Sam Green. "We could stay at home and play on our ZX27s all day," shouted Sterling. "An obscure type of old computer that only plays a tennis game from the 1970s, shouted Scarlett. "You can't just cancel school for a day and a half," said Ryan desperately. "I can, and I just did," bellowed Mr. Carter, turning to the rest of the dining hall with both arms in the air, like he'd just scored a goal. All the children cheered. "And now I'm cancelling homework forever." An even bigger, happier cheer went up, and then Maurice Fawcett started a chant to the tune of the song called Seven Nation Army by a band named the White Stripes. Maurice wasn't a fan of the White Stripes, but he'd heard people chant the name of some politician to this tune on TV, and he thought it sounded good. It went, "Oh, Headmaster Carter, oh, Headmaster Carter." Immediately, everyone joined in because, of course, everyone was very happy about Mr. Carter's latest ruling. "Oh, no, really," said Mr. Carter. "No need. Oh, Headmaster Carter, oh, Headmaster Carter," went the whole dining hall, with the rest of them pointing at Mr. Carter in the time of the chant, except for the reception to Year 2 children, who had no idea what was going on. As the song continued, Ryan seemed to shrink a little. His eye level came back down in line with Mr. Carter's, who looked at him sympathetically. "It's confusing, isn't it, Ryan?" said Mr. Carter, because now I'm the only one being naughty. And so for you to carry on fighting me, you've got to become a goody two-shoes, which is just a bit sad for you, I imagine. No, that isn't what's happening. Just stop it, Ryan, went a shout. Yeah, give it up, Ryan, went another. Leave Mr. Carter alone, Ryan. It's not really a tennis game. I mean, there's no rackets, just little walls that move up and down. Oh, Headmaster Carter. Ryan looked around. The pupils who weren't chanting had sat down and were tucking in happily to cake mixed stew with ice cream mash and a side plate of confectionery for dessert. Mr. Carter was joining in the chant about himself, jabbing his hands in the air in time with it, and some of the stronger and larger 6B boys were trying to lift him onto their shoulders. Through the windows that looked out onto the corridor, Ryan could see some of the other children who had decided to act immediately on Mr. Carter's promise of a day off. They were running and shouting and spinning down the corridor in accordance with the rules as they barged each other towards the exit. At least 3 were wearing funny hats. On the other side, in the playground, he could see the 2 tortoises wandering around, not having been put back into their pen. Above the sound of the chanting and running and the munching, he thought he could hear Casper still singing "The Wheels on the Bus" as a teaching method for some class somewhere. Oh well, thought Ryan. Just a quick reminder, I mean Mr. Carter in Ryan's body. At least it can't get any worse. At which point he heard something else. "Excuse me," said a voice very loudly. "Can anyone tell me where to find the head teacher?" At the door stood 2 people, a man and a woman. The man, who spoke with quite a strong northern accent, was bald with a moustache, and the woman was Indian, with long, straight, dark hair. He was holding a briefcase. She, a notebook. "Who wants to know?" asked Mr. Carter. "I am Mr. Mann. This is my colleague, Miss Malik. We're inspectors from Offhead." "Oh, head teacher went the chant, before stopping, for a very long time, until finally Morris Fawcett went, "Tuh." Chapter 26. This is getting weird. The hastily convened meeting between Mr. Carter, Ryan, in reality, I think we're good, and the Offhead inspectors that followed lunch cannot be said to have gone particularly well. Mr. Carter had begun by trying to be, well, like the real Mr. Carter. It didn't last for very long. So I know it looks not too good right now at this establishment, but I promise you, Mr. Mann, sorry, is that really your name? Yes, said Mr. Mann, frowning. He was sitting opposite Mr. Carter's desk. Miss Malik was next to him. As in, like, Mr. Mann? Brian Mann is my name, yes, I have said. So, which one are you? Mr. Mann frowned a bit more and exchanged a glance with Miss Malik. I'm Mr. Mann, and this is Miss Malik, as I thought I made clear already. No, said Mr. Carter, I mean, which Mr. Mann are you? Mr. Muddle? Mr. Worry? Mr. Wobbly Tickle? Mr. Carter, said Miss Malik. No, that's me. Well, sort of, said Mr. Carter. I'm sure that's very amusing, but we need to talk about the state of the school. Right. It's in 1, said Mr. Mann grimly. Yes, I see what you're saying. A state, he said even more grimly. Yes, I get it, honestly, said Mr. Carter. Don't spell out your jokes, Mr. Mann. Didn't Mr. Funny ever tell you that? Mr. Mann looked more confused than ever. It is, though, to be fair, said Mr. Carter, a state school, so... He poked Mr. Mann in the arm with his finger. Eh? Do you see? Ha 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 ha. Mr. Carter's laugh didn't seem to be a real laugh, but an ironic one that was making fun, in other words, of Mr. Mann's joke about the school being in a state, which hadn't actually been a joke. Mr. Mann looked at Miss Malik, who shrugged. Mr. Mann opened his briefcase and took out a wad of papers. OK, well, I was hoping we weren't going to have to do this, but I'm afraid that we have to report back on our findings to Offhead, and I'm pretty sure that, based on those findings, they will give Bracketwood a rating of inadequate, which will mean, given how badly the school has performed in the past, an immediate close... Ahem! Mr. Mann, Miss Malik and Mr. Carter all looked around. The person saying ahem, he was actually saying the word ahem, not coughing, was Ryan Ward. He was standing at the door to Mr. Carter's office. Excuse me, Mr. Mann, Miss Malik? Yes? Could I have a word? Mr. Mann turned to Mr. Carter. Do you normally let pupils just walk in here and interrupt meetings whenever they like? Mr. Carter shrugged, mainly because he was keen to know what Ryan was going to say. Said Mr. Mann with a glance at Miss Malik. I suppose nothing would surprise me about this school and the attitude of its head teacher any more. Rude, said Mr. Carter, talking about me like that, like I'm not here. I do apologise for interrupting, said Ryan, walking in, but I thought perhaps you should know that Mr. Carter isn't actually very well at the moment. What? Said Mr. Carter. As you will discover if you check the local hospital records, Mr. Carter unfortunately had a very bad fall recently and had to be hospitalised after being knocked unconscious. Since he came back to the school, he hasn't quite been himself," continued Ryan. "Don't be crazy," said Mr. Carter. "I've totally been myself. I've been so like myself, I'm not even joking." Ryan made a "there you go" a glance at the off-head inspectors, who looked at each other with raised eyebrows. Miss Mallock put her notebook down and rummaged in her bag. Mr. Carter got up from behind the desk. "All right, I see you're starting to believe him. Well, what you need to know about this pupil, Ryan Ward, is that he's the naughtiest boy in the school, so he would probably just say anything, including making everyone think the head's gone upside down his head for a prank." "It's true," said Miss Mallock, looking at her phone. "We have access to hospital records, and yes, he was admitted to concussion last week." "Can you please stop talking about me like I'm not here?" said Mr. Carter. "Well, you aren't here," said Ryan Ward, and then, pointing to himself, "You're here." "OK," said Mr. Mann, getting up and closing his briefcase. "This is getting weird." "I agree," said Miss Mallock, standing as well. "So look," said Mr. Mann, "I have no idea whether what this boy says is true, but clearly, Mr. Carter, you have been unwell. We at Offhead are nothing if not fair, and so we will delay our rating of the school." And here Mr. Mann glanced at Miss Mallock. She glanced down at her notebook, then back up at him and nodded as if confirming something unsaid. "For a week. Just 1 week. This is something we do in unusual circumstances, so you as the head teacher of the school have 1 week to put your house in order. And," said Miss Mallock, "do try not to get it back to its usual." She searched for the appropriate word. "Rubbishness?" offered Mr. Carter. "Yes, I suppose it's usual rubbish standard. What we need to see if Brackett Wood is not to be closed down is concrete evidence of radical improvement." "So," said Mr. Mann, "you need to prove yourself a grown-up, Mr. Carter. You're at the bottom now, but your slate can be wiped clean." Mr. Carter sniggered, as if he was trying not to. "What are you laughing at?" said Miss Mallock. "Sorry," said Mr. Carter, still sniggering, and then he pointed a finger at Mr. Mann. He said wipe and bottom in the same sentence. Mr. Carter's snigger became a full-blown laugh as he stopped trying to suppress it. Mr. Mann frowned. Miss Mallock shook her head, and then both of them made for the door. 1 week, said Mr. Mann as he went. "Best of luck," said Miss Mallock to Ryan Ward. She didn't, in all honesty, sound very hopeful. Chapter 27. All 14 Varieties. After the off-head inspectors had left, Mr. Carter smiled, shook his head and sat down behind the head teacher's gleaming new silver desk. "It's very weird, isn't it, Mr. Carter?" "Well," said Ryan, "finally we agree on something. OK, so." He came over to the desk. "Look, you've had some fun. You've had your little laughs at my expense. You've made the school into a wacky and crazy place for your friends. Obviously now that Offhead have turned up and the whole school is under threat, we need to stop this. But I'm prepared, unusually for me, to let it all go. No punishments. Once we're back in our normal bodies, of course." Mr. Carter nodded as if he agreed, as if clearly this was the only way to go. But then, without pausing the movement, his head went from up and down to side to side. And how are we going to do that? Get back to our own bodies, I mean." Ryan stared at him. He opened his mouth to speak and then shut it again, because he didn't know the answer to that. "You see, Mr. Carter, when you're Mr. Carter, the head teacher, you have all the answers. But when you're Mr. Carter inside my body, it all gets a bit more mysterious." Ryan took a deep breath, then got up and walked over to the window. "Well, there must be something we can do. Apart from the imminent problem of Offhead, what about the long term? We can't be in each other's bodies forever. Doesn't that worry you?" "Forever? Yeah, but I'm enjoying it for the moment," said Mr. Carter. "That's the good thing about being a kid, Mr. Carter. You live in the moment. You don't worry about forever." Ryan turned around to face him. "Ryan, really, are you honestly saying you don't feel at all uncomfortable with this whole situation?" Mr. Carter thought for a moment. Truth was, he had felt uncomfortable at first. Of course he had. Just being in a 43-year-old body, so much more full of aches and pains than his own, felt very strange, as did wearing Mr. Carter's suits and his pants and his big shoes, although they did fit his feet, because his feet were Mr. Carter's feet. And this all went, all without even mentioning how weird it was going for a wee. So we won't. "Well, yes, Mr. Carter, some parts of it do make me feel uncomfortable." "I mean, what about going to the toilet?" "Yes, let's not mention that." "No, all right. But just living in your house." "You're living in my flat." "Of course I am. I can't live in my house, can I? You're there. And my mum would be confused and probably scared by her son's new head teacher coming round and asking to sleep there." "How did you get in?" Mr. Carter rummaged in his suit pocket. "Do? What's this? In your suit pocket?" He made a stupid person face by sticking his tongue into his underlip. Is that a word, underlip? You know, the bit of a chin that is sort of also your mouth, and said in a stupid person voice, "Oh, they're your keys." Ryan shook his head. "Be careful, okay? I don't like the idea of you wandering around in there touching my stuff." "I'm not touching your stuff, apart from when I have to go to the toilet." "I thought we weren't mentioning that," Ryan sighed. "Anyway, I suppose I have to live with it for the moment, you being in my house." "No, I have to live with it. It's a very boring house. There are no toys, no video games, the telly's tiny and the bed's too big." "The bed's fine for me." Ryan shook his head. "Black duvet, I mean weird, almost creepy. And a pet wouldn't go amiss, cheer the place up. What about a cat? Shall I get a cat?" "I'm allergic to cats, don't get a cat." "All right, calm down. Have you ever thought about getting something else apart from cheese and cold meat in the fridge?" "Shut up. I like cheese and cold meat. It's better than having frozen pizza every day, like your mum tells me is my absolute favourite thing, apparently." "It's not my favourite thing." "It isn't?" "No, that would be real pizza. A bit like they make at the place opposite yours. Delivered." "Pardon? It's very good, and not too expensive, even when you've ordered all 14 varieties on the menu." Ryan stared at him hard. "How did you—" Mr. Carter made the stupid face again. He didn't bother to say anything this time. He just reached inside his jacket and pulled out a credit card with the name M.J. Carter written clearly on it. "That is illegal," shouted Ryan. "Well, the devilishly hot chili explosion certainly should be. Sorry about the toilet, by the way." "I'll call the police." "And tell them what?" Ryan went very red in the face. He squeezed up his fists. "That you're a very, very bad boy," he shouted. Said Mr. Carter. "Well, I don't know if a year 6 boy phoning 999 and saying his head teacher is a very, very bad boy would actually constitute wasting police time. But I wouldn't like to try it, personally. Anyway, point is, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know when we are going to body swap back. But I do know that right now, being the head teacher of this school, I'm having, how can I put this, a laugh. And one of the things that's really making it a laugh is how much everything I'm doing annoys you." Ryan seemed about to burst with frustration. He shut his eyes and shook his head violently, as if he had a mad twitch. "But you're destroying the school," he shouted. "You heard those inspectors. If you carry on like this, Brackett Wood won't just get inadequate. It'll get an emergency closure notice. And then how will you feel?" Mr. Carter took this in. He frowned as if tasting the idea, and then he said, "Unbelievably." "Yes?" "Proud." "What?" "Well, as you said earlier, Mr. C, I'm the naughtiest boy in the school, and I'm proud of being the naughtiest boy in the school. And how proud will I be when I get the school closed down? That will be the naughtiest thing a naughty boy has ever achieved at any school ever." Ryan stared at him. "Is this really who you are, Ryan Ward? A boy who thinks only about himself? What about all the other pupils at the school? Hasn't it ever occurred to you to think about what they might be feeling?" Mr. Carter laughed and shook his head. "Oh, Mr. C, you're in my body. You're hanging out with my friends and my classmates. But you've still got no idea, have you, what school children of my age want? Do you? Because I promise you, every single pupil at this school will be overjoyed about the school closing down." For a moment after saying this, Mr. Carter felt as if he was going to laugh. Not in a friendly way, in a mad super villain in a Marvel or Bond film way. That is, it felt as if he'd given the speech that proved he was surely going to win, even if that meant things were going to turn out badly for most of the world, even if he was, in other words, the baddie. Within Mr. Carter's body, therefore, something stopped Ryan laughing like this. Hang on, he thought. Am I the baddie? All this was knocking about in Mr. Carter's head, which of course, Ryan's head really, or at least Ryan's mind, when he was shaken out of it by a noise like a tiny sob. He looked over. Behind the glass of the office door, he could see standing there Deanna Baxter, and one thing she very much didn't like, or didn't look, was overjoyed. And that is where we will leave part 5 of Head Kid by David Baddiel. I'll be back soon with the next part of this fantastic story and lots more stories and videos coming your way very soon. If you'd like to subscribe or hit a like, that's always appreciated. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.